Hey everyone, today we are tearing down the EVGA RTX 3080 FTW3. So we're going to disassemble this card. This one should be much more straightforward than the Founders Edition card, for which we have a separate teardown on the channel already. That one was actually not as complex as previous generations, but for the first time disassembling it, it took several hours. It became a 3 to 5 minute job, though, after that, after getting some experience with it. This, though, is a very standard assembly, at least externally. So we're going to take a look at it. We'll get some PCB shots and potentially send those along to Buildzoid and see if we can get analysis, assuming there's anything worth talking about underneath. And this is also the card we're going to be using for overclocking streams. By the time this teardown goes up, there should already be stream recaps and stream archives for you to watch. So let's get started. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Team T-Force Cardea Ceramic C440 M.2 SSD, available in 1TB and 2TB capacities with PCIe Gen 4 support for high transfer speeds. Team claims that its SSD can do sequential speeds up to 5 GB per second read and 4.4 GB per second write, or 750,000 IOPS for random reads and writes. Team rates its SSD for 3,600 total terabytes written, and the ceramic heat spreader directly conducts from the controller to help manage SSD temperatures under high loads. Learn more at the link in the description below. So this card, we've already done baseline testing on it, and other than getting a video out of the disassembly to show people how it goes together, we also need to put thermocouples on the card for additional thermal testing for the final review. So we've got baseline numbers, but we do have to disassemble it anyway. And the card is the one that performed the highest in our full stock overclocking stream. We already have a recap up for that if you're interested. And that's because it has a higher power target out of the box than the others do. That said, Joe Stepanti and I have already changed this VBIOS. There's a VBIOS switch right there. You have an OC mode and a normal mode, where OC mode is the higher power target and should be the higher clocks out of the box, and normal mode is the lower of them and quieter. So we've already flashed the OC VBIOS with a special VBIOS that has a fully unlocked 900 watt power target, and not sure if that's going to be made available to the public at any point, but our plan is to basically put a liquid nitrogen pod on it and then get a voltage controller on, or modify the voltage provided to the card so that we can overclock it further. So this is our baseline for liquid nitrogen overclocking because it was performing the best for that so far. But it doesn't mean it's the best card necessarily. You'll have to check the review, obviously, to see that, especially for stock performance for non-overclocking. There are headers on it. There's an auxiliary fan header here where you can control a case fan via GPU temperature if you prefer. There's an RGB header there for, I guess, synchronization. And then we've got 3 different colored fan headers here for the fans hooked up to the card. This is new. Normally they just go with all black, all gray, or all white. But we'll take a look into it, see where they're routed. My assumption is that changing the color on these probably helps with RMAs and repair so that they can more easily help the customer identify if a particular fan has gone wrong. I do like that they're accessible externally. That's good. It does not look like you'll be able to replace the fan completely externally, unfortunately, but we'll take a look at that too. For the rest of the card, this one has gotten the most attention for its looks, and not for good reasons, but EVGA is doing a change where they're gonna have a swap out plate here so you can get a gray, black, or some other color in the future. So they definitely got a ton of criticism for this, probably rightfully so, frankly. And there's gonna be a swap out piece for that. So maybe we'll look into how easy that is to remove in case you're one of the early buyers who wants to swap it. There's also one on the back, although that's not gonna be particularly visible in most cases. Okay, let's take it apart. So we are working on the GN Medium mod mat. There are not many of these left in stock. We have a couple dozen left right now. They've been selling through fast, but they're on store.gamersnexus.net if you want to pick one up. I like to use them for tracking screws on the grid in case it's a complex card, and then it's also got some other diagrams on it. It's just an anti-static work surface. We've got a common ground point hooked up over here to a grounding strap if you want to exercise more caution with the more expensive cards. And it is available on the store now. We're also going to use our toolkit for this one, which is also on store.gamersnexus.net, but recently sold through. Okay, so this is a leaf spring. It's the one NVIDIA used, but same retention mechanism and bracket as NVIDIA is using. They're probably selling it to the partners. I don't know if this is a reference PCB yet. I need to get into it, but basically there's a reference, there's a Founders Edition, and the board partners who are getting into cards early typically will use a reference PCB provided by NVIDIA so that they can get a card done quickly. So we're going to track these screws. This one goes about in the middle with the card oriented that direction. This one's got both silhouettes on it. I'm going to remove the backplate first. Does that screw a different size? No. Okay, there's a nut on the other side of this one that I'm holding, and there it goes. I think there might be a nut on the other side of this one too, but I can't access it from here, so we'll come back to that. This one does have one as well. Okay, so there's one more hidden under here. So this technically is not a warranty void if removed sticker, which is good because those are actually not enforceable in the US anymore. It is a tamper seal. EVGA has told us in the past that they don't use it to enforce any kind of warranty. If they did, you'd have a legal ability to refute it. But that's just allegedly for them to be able to tell if the user has modified the card at all. They say it's to help expedite warranties, but it could also be to help deny them. We don't really have a good way of checking, at least not en masse. So what I did to remove this one, it did have a nut on the other side of it, but it was inside the card and inaccessible to me. So the best way to get it out is to just pull the plate up after you remove all the others and provide some upwards force to the screw, and then it'll come off. Just keep in mind that there is now a piece of metal floating around in the card from the other side of this, from the nut. So we're going to have to get in there and remove it, obviously, before reassembly, but we're taking it apart anyway. So backplate, I am sad to say, is not being leveraged at all, despite being a pretty good amount of surface area, good amount of aluminum there. So this is not contacted to the back. What you'd like to see, we've done a lot of testing over the years, many years of different GPU launches, always the same thing where actually EVGA has been through this before, specifically with the ACX series. It is what birthed the ICX series and was a good change, and unfortunately not present here. Doesn't matter a ton. Well, depends on the card. Generally, no, but it doesn't hurt to have better cooling. And when you spend more for a higher end card, we do like to see the extra couple pennies per thermal pad. So ideally, they'd have pads here. You can actually see the blocks where the memory modules are. So there's gonna be memory modules pretty much on each one of these on the other side of the board. 2 of them will be missing, but you can see like it's about 1 finger width size. That's a block, that's a memory module, that's memory module, that's memory module. And ideally there's a thermal pad here that connects to the plate, because despite not being finned, it's still surface area, even though it's just flat and inefficient. And it's also, depending on your CPU cooler, it's in a position where it will radiate heat up and into a tower cooler, which will then wick it away. Or if you have a top-mounted rad, that'll deal with it too. So we would like to see thermal pads there ideally. This is probably a simple mod you could do to improve performance. Maybe we'll look into that in the review after I get the thermocouples on here. Only other stuff on the backside, this is very interesting. So there's a cutout here. It looks like I can see a cutout in a copper plate too. If we orient the card, oh, there's the screw in there. You can see, or you should be able to see that there's a copper plate up there. And this is just sort of an interesting design decision where they're trying to exhaust some heat through the card. And this is a better spot to do it too. It'll exhaust behind a tower cooler and straight into your rear exhaust fan if you have a standard ATX case setup. So let's just see if that actually lines up with, it mostly lines up. This is so hexagonal hole patterns are more efficient than slots, but it's still not really the most efficient use of space, but it is better than we've seen in previous generations. So they're trying to push some air through there via these fans. Now they're not quite aligned with it, but the fans, they don't blow straight down. There's gonna be some air shooting out the side, so it'll make its way out. Rest of the backside, we've got some UP controllers here, and then this is an LED for the EVGA logo. We're gonna disconnect that. Never pull on the wires, obviously. You wanna disconnect at the header. This one doesn't have anything on the other side securing it, so you just pull that out. I'm just disconnecting this because as I work on the card, I don't want to have this get caught on anything, but it's not actually required to be disconnected. And now we can remove the leaf spring, so let's do that. Like I said, we're using our own toolkit here that we specially designed for GPU disassembly. On the store, out of stock, but we'll be kind of opening and closing back orders depending on our current status with orders. And for when you remove these, you want to do, I do about 30 to 50% loose for each screw before I remove it completely. That way they're all releasing tension at the same time or thereabouts. And we're just going to drop that right here on the grid so we can keep track of that. The screws are retained, and they're captive screws. On the other side, you can see the sort of washer to contain them. Okay, now we need to remove the I/O plate. Unfortunately, this card doesn't stand up on its own. So everything so far has been a Phillips 1 screwdriver, including the larger leaf spring screws. Those are still Phillips 1. This is going to be a Phillips 0. There's a Phillips 0. We're going to use that now. Did it come out? Oh, there it is. That's what we've had rolling around in there from that one screw. Don't forget that if you are doing a disassembly and reassembly. Don't leave that floating in there. You'll short something. So there's 3 screws here that I can see right now anyway. Okay, I/O plate's removed. This card has a vertical fin orientation, not horizontal. So the air is going to actually go into the board and into the glass. This is standard. There's really only 2 ways to orient the fin. Okay. Yeah, some of the air will come out through these pinholes in the fin stack that are going horizontally. For the most part, though, you've got vertical exhaust into the board and into the glass. And the only other way to do this is with angular fins like the FE design. So they are not wasting a ton of space with the shroud. It's not containing the fins. That's good. We've seen a lot of manufacturers screw that up. Let's remove the board from the cooler. This just takes some care where you have to release it from the thermal paste. So now that we've loosened this, keep in mind there are at least 3 cables plugged in. So what I'm going to do is lift it up slightly, look inside to make sure I know what I'm working with before I pull at anything. I can see where the thermal pads are now, so I don't want to pull too hard because one of them's coming down, and we don't want to stretch out the pad and reduce its thickness by doing so. So what I'm going to do is shove in a jimmy, and then we can push the thermal pad off without stretching it in a way that will damage it. And I'm going to disconnect these 3 fan cables. These are just clipped in, very easy to remove. Just push the clip. Okay, should be, oh, there's one more cable on the top over here. So I'm going to disconnect that before we go any further. This is why you always want to look into the card at eye level with it so you don't pull on a cable that you are unaware of. Okay, so let's look at the cooler for PCB. Is very interesting with all the holes in it. It's amazing the reduction of space this generation on PCB usage. This helps as we get higher and higher current capability MOSFETs too. So we have this large header. We've got these 3 for the fans. I'm confident of that. These are fan cables. This is a what you would call a thermal putty. We actually have some of this, so we can replace it as needed. Thermal putty so thermal pads generally are sticky. They tend to stay together. You tend, for some of them, to get multiple uses. Thermal putty, you don't always get multiple uses. And you just smear it on with like a spreader. And it's kind of like a paste, except it will fill larger gaps. So in the sense of spreading like this and being a little bit almost liquidy when you first apply it, it's like a paste, but a paste can't fill a gap this large. So that's why they've got that there. That's for the inductors. Inductors aren't as thermally sensitive as a lot of components. A lot of them can go to like 150C, but it doesn't hurt to leverage this huge heatsink to cool down the VRM. Also, you got to figure, even if the inductor itself doesn't really care because it's just a copper coil inside of a metal housing, it's still going to heat up the board and the nearby components, so sinking it will get it away from the PCB and into something else. So then for the cold plate, there's a copper cold plate here. You can see the memory contact, and we've got memory modules there. There's one here. They're missing memory modules for a potential higher SKU card later. Not uncommon to have missing modules. That is intentional. And then the thermal paste application for the GPU is dead center as expected. Pretty good spread on it. One thing to talk about here too is the GPU conducts into the same plate as the memory. They are sharing a cooling solution and sinking into the heat pipes, and then the heat pipes as normal go into the fins. So typically, when you share a thermal solution, a cold plate, with like a liquid cooler, which is a bit of a different scenario than today, but if we were looking at a hybrid card with a water cooler on it, typically when you sync the memory into the same plate as the GPU, if it's like a 120 or 140 mil CLC, then you are going to increase the effective temperature of the GPU because you're cooling more power with the same solution, so the water temperature is higher. In this instance, it's an air cooler, works a little bit differently, and you'll see in our review how things perform. Okay, so we'll come back to the cooler in a second. Now we're gonna take a look at the PCB though. So for the PCB, Joe. Okay, so PCB-wise, the interesting part again is all the holes they've cut in it, where it's not like that NVIDIA approach where NVIDIA's got like they sent a bolt of lightning down it and split it at the end. It's very interesting. But this one's got the power connectors in a traditional spot. There are 3 8-pins. For shunt resistors, we've got one shunt resistor up here, shunt resistor down here next to, actually that's a fuse right there, that red piece. So this shunt resistor is going to correspond with the PCIe slot. If you're doing a shunt resistor mod and shorting things, you generally don't want to short that one. It's the ones associated with the power connectors you want to short. And shorting them just allows you to trick the card into drawing more power. These are very power limited, by the way. When we overclocked this one full stock without a special V BIOS, it was extremely power limited, could do more with more power, but some of that's EVGA, some of that's NVIDIA. So this one, though, you would want to skip. You don't generally want to force more power through the board. So the motherboard, that is. So let's take a look back at the other side. There should probably be a few more of these, yes. 2 more shunt resistors right here, and then 2 more right here. So we've got 5 in this block alone. And you take basically if you wanted to check which corresponds to which header, if you want to split which ones you're shorting or something, you would just take a continuity check from the leg of one of these, doesn't matter which leg, to one of the 12-volt legs on these PCIe blocks. And actually we have on our mod mat, very conveniently, a PCIe pinout diagram here. You've got 8 and 4. These are 8s. And you can see clip side. So then you would just match, and you could pull up a diagram online too. You'd match the yellow, the 12 volt, and then you do a continuity check, and that'll tell you where you short the shunts. This is another fuse right there. There's actually a fuse here, a fuse here. Generally speaking, these don't actually protect your card from a failure. They're not fast enough to respond as we understand it, but they're useful in troubleshooting a defect, especially or primarily for the RMA department. So if you send in a card that's had something blow up, they'll look at the fuses where they exist. They may be able to repair it and send it back faster, or send you a new one, and then they'll try and fix it for a B stock release. So that covers the small components for the shunt resistors and the fuses. Let's see what else there is that we can point out. Joe, what do you think this is? This controller?
I don't know, I can barely see it. I'm blind. I need to go get my
eyes checked. Okay, let's pull up some of the pads here. I'm not going to completely remove these because I want to make it a little easier for myself when I reassemble, but we'll at least expose some of the MOSFETs here. So let me try and get a read on this one. We'll have probably have a separate board analysis. Oh, this is interesting. Actually, that's new to me. The GPU is marked. So you'll see a blue dot and a black dot. The last time I saw this was when Kingpin was marking KP GPUs for a contest, and he was doing it so that he could look up the quality of the GPU. But I'm not sure what their reasoning is here, so I'm actually going to call our EVGA rep, and he's going to tell me he doesn't know that, and then he'll say, "That's weird, really?" And then he'll call someone, and then he'll tell me the answer. All right, you there?
Yeah, hello?
Hey, I'm recording a video right now on the FTW3 doing a teardown.
Yeah.
There is on the metal frame around the substrate, there's a blue dot and a black dot in the top left corner. Do you know what that is?
I need to check. Can you send me a picture of it? I
Yeah.
can check.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I'll send you a picture, and then you can let me know if you know anything about it. Yeah, so we're getting a check on that, but it could be QC. It could also be potentially binning for different cards. So sometimes, actually a lot of the time, board partners will have PCBs that they use for multiple lines for multiple product lines where they actually use the same components overall, or most of the same components, but change things like the GPU bin. So for example, EVGA in the past has had like a 1080 black and a 1080 gaming, or a 1080 gaming OC, and a lot of those will be the same board and even the same cooler, but they just swap the GPUs on them based on the quality of the silicon for frequency. So that could be what that is. If you're wondering how that's checked, we have a video of MSI's factory actually, where they swap the GPUs in and out of a socketable video card to check the silicon quality. And I actually just got a text back from him after I sent the photo of this, and he said, weird, okay, let me check. So definitely called the response. All right, let's clean off the GPU. The paste application's good. Give them credit for that. Oh, wow. Wow. Okay, well, the spread is even. Just go for removing the paste on the GPU and observe how dried it is.
I call that junk. That's bad.
That's super dry. GPU identifier GA102-200-KD-A1. So it's the same identifier, as I recall right now, as the FE card. We'll put them next to each other on the screen in case. But there's your GPU. In terms of liquid nitrogen pot clearance, I think we'll just barely skate by here. The caps are far enough out, so we should be okay there. And the rest of the board we'll save for further analysis and our overclocking streams to tell you how it performs, how it holds up. For the controllers on the backside, we've got a UP9511R and then a U5656500, I think is what that says. So let's take a look at the rest of the cooler. In terms of heat pipes, they've got some, it looks like those are either 8 or 10 mil. Let me check. Some larger heat pipes in there. There are the round variety as opposed to the flat one. Those are about 8 mil heat pipes. At least that one was 8.78. So heat pipes going mostly over the GPU. As a reminder, heat pipes are most effective when directly over the source of heat. You can actually still see the imprint of the GPU. It's approximately here. And at least I can see it from the camera angle where I wiped off the thermal paste. So that's going to align with, there's a heat pipe there, that's an 8 mil, there's an 8 mil, there's an 8 mil. So we've got 3 8 mils directly contacting where the GPU would be contacting. And then remember, we're also cooling memory with these. So these are also going through, you've got a 6 mil going through memory module here, 8 mil through memory, same for these. So there's pretty good contact everywhere. The only thing missing are heat pipes up here. So when I do VRAM thermal testing, I'll probably test some of these because these look like they will be cooled the worst. So we'll check those for the thermal performance. For the VRM, we've got contact here. That's just an aluminum plate, contacts the inductors. That's a MOSFET line right there. There's more over here. So it's this is a huge VRM. Inductors here, MOSFETs here, and for the rest of the cooling solution, well, if you wanted to take the shroud off to replace the fans, what you would do is you'd pull these screws, and then you'd pull, these fans are unfortunately not pin to pad contact, they're wired directly to the fan. So there's 1, 2, 3, looks like 4 screws. There's also a screw inside in the blade up here for the shroud. So you would need to take the screw way up here out to remove the shroud as well. And keep in mind, you've also got an LED cable running for this, and that's going to be this cable right here. You can see it's got a red and a ground, and I don't know what the other one is. I don't know the pinout exactly, but that might be a 5 volt or 12 volt and a ground, depending on how they color code it. So anyway, that's the RGB LEDs. And the fans, you just take a bunch of screws out and swap them, but not particularly easy to access compared to some other vendors. You know, the AMD board partners honestly do a much better job with replaceable fans. I'm not sure why that technological advancement split between the two companies like that, but you see Sapphire and XFX in the past have done a much better job where they have a socketable fan that's pin to pad customer can replace it without even taking a single screw out of the card. Maybe one single screw that holds the fan in, but other than that, the rest of it can stay the same. So I'd really like to see that applied to some of these NVIDIA cards. Obviously, I haven't taken them all apart yet. It's possible some do, but that's an improvement that they could do on the customer accessibility side. So I said we would look at how hard it is to replace this red thing. I thought I could maybe just pry it out with a screwdriver, but that wasn't working too well. So we're gonna take these out. This is a 1.5 mil, which we also have. So this card, everything you need is actually in our toolkit to take it apart. Those are Phillips 1. Okay. I'm removing the screws for the shroud right now. Technically not for the fans. These don't hold the fans in at all, actually. All right, there's the shroud. That's at least a little bit easier than expected because we didn't have to deal with any stupid cables except for this one, which is easy to route out. Okay, there's the shroud. If you hate LEDs, you could go in here to completely kill them, but it seems not necessary. Now we can get more appreciation for the amount of metal on this heatsink. There's a lot of fins. So let's move this aside and take a look at the, as one of our viewers called it, Taylor Swift lipstick, to see how hard it is to remove this red stuff. Yeah, that's not coming out without breaking it, I don't think. I'll follow up with EVGA on this, but this might be like a whole shroud replacement because I don't see an easy way to remove this without scratching the hell out of parts of it. So for the red shroud, we just checked with EVGA and it is molded in there. You can't remove it, but if you have a red card and you don't want it, they'll have a way for you to either swap cards or remove the shroud and replace it. And they're gonna have a black front and back for that instead of red, but the back plate will retain its red line. So that's the EVGA card. Overall, very easy to disassemble. It's about 16 screws, the same as the Founders Edition card, but they are easier in that it's basically just Phillips, and then if you want to take the shroud out, it's a 1.5 mil Allen. So that gets you to more than 16 at that point, because now you're taking the fan assembly apart and all that stuff. But to get to the paste, it's about 16. Pretty easy overall, and there's a few places we'd like to see improved. Thermal pads between the backplate and the PCB so that they can actually leverage that backplate for more than just structure. It should do a little bit. A lot of the time, depending on the card, that might be 1 or 2 degrees, but it's also like you start spending so much money on a card, and it's one of those, if you can make it perform a little better, then why wouldn't you? Cost savings normally is the answer. But anyway, cooler design's interesting. We'll talk about the performance in the review. The shifting, one thing I didn't mention, the fan here in the middle is shifted down 10 millimeters. EVGA claims this helps with performance. Perhaps it does. There's not a great way to test because we'd have to do A/B testing, so you'd have to move it back up and redesign the shroud, and we'd basically need their prototypes to verify that claim. Either way, though, I kind of doubt that it has a huge difference, just like the thermal pads on the back don't, but if you're arguing over every couple degrees, then it doesn't hurt, unless it looks like a carnival distortion mirror, then it might hurt a little bit. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more as always. Check back for the full review of this card. We already have baseline testing in, but now it's time to do some more advanced testing, including liquid nitrogen with it. And you can go to store.gamersnexus.net if you'd like to pick up one of our mod mats. The toolkits are out of stock. They're in and out of back order depending on what is going on at the time, so keep an eye out for that. Otherwise, patreon.com/gamersnexus if you like this content. Thank you for watching. We'll see you all next time.